Hello, everybody. I'm Tom Sue. This is the CISOs office hours from Inversion 6. I'm here with my buddy and colleague, Jack Nicholson, who's one of our other CISOs. Jack, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Jack Nicholson. I'm one of the CISOs at Inversion 6. I've been in information security for over 30 years.
30 years, and he's only 27 years old, so you figure that out. So today, Jack and I, we're revisiting a conversation that we had a couple weeks ago about how, remember, we're both fractional CISOs. We help a lot of smaller to medium-sized businesses, but I think these lessons can apply to you if you're a corporate CISO and you have a program, or you're a one-man band, sometimes as they're called, in dealing with cybersecurity awareness and awareness overall, to make sure that we talk about the people, process, and technology, and how do you address that? So first, Jack, you had some really great ideas about what a CISO ought to be doing in terms of administering or even implementing a cybersecurity awareness program. What are your thoughts?
So when I first got started in security, I always saw cybersecurity awareness as something we needed to do to train people so they didn't click links. And it was very much a operational part of security. And as I started to roll out more changes in my organization, like stronger password requirements for MFA, putting in place more hurdles for the users to have to go through, what I learned was security awareness actually started to become my mechanism to really lead security. And I started leading my security program with awareness by putting in front of a large change an awareness message, right? Making sure that we did training on the importance of good passwords right before we implemented a new password policy. Making sure that we did good messaging and training on the importance of multi-factor and what multi-factor is, and how to use it at home, and what's important about business, and doing a good communication plan around that before we implemented MFA really helped enable those changes. It helped people adopt them easier. There was less pushback. So I really kind of took security awareness training as not just a thing that we do to educate our employees, but it's really the mechanism I use to lead the entire security awareness program. So I'm really leading security through awareness.
Well, if you think about it, Jack, it's almost like a politician. You have to run for office, and you have to get people to buy into your not so much strategy, but what you're for. 2 cars in every garage, whatever. What kind of leader you're still a leader. You're actually in your awareness activity, selling the program, and it's usually you as the front spokesperson.
Always be selling. It sounds silly. We think we're technologists, but we really need to be salesmen. And you can look at it as salesy, but it also could just be good empathy, right? You need to make sure that people understand the why, right? Why are you making me do this? Why are there additional steps? Why can't you just let me do my job? And that's where I think security awareness comes in. It really helps make that easier for everybody to understand the why behind the changes you're making. And also, your users are the most valuable security sensor that you have. You now have an army of human sensors out there looking for things that don't seem right, and they're reporting them back. And more than not, you are going to find your security event from a user reporting it more likely than one of your expensive security tools detecting it. So that's why we really want to emphasize with our users, not just the training, but the reporting. And this kind of goes in the reinforcement of that carrot and stick. I think a lot of people push out those phishing and the training, and they really put emphasis on how many people clicked the link. I don't agree with that. I think that's important. We don't want too many clicks, but how many people reported it is a far more valuable metric. You want to make sure you've created a culture and an awareness that reporting, even if you've clicked the link, still report it. That's how we can protect them and everybody else at the company.
Well, thanks, Jack. I was wondering if you had a story or two that you might be able to tell of someone actually contacted you about an incident or something suspicious.
Well, I'm going to tell another story, not something that somebody reported, more, how I kind of came to this is, I would roll out a change and I would get a lot of phone calls and negative feedback. Um, I did a big security awareness campaign. We did a week of emails, and then I also did a live security presentation to the employees. And then I rolled out a big change, and I was expecting to get a lot of pushback. And I didn't. And instead, I started asking some people, hey, what do you think of that change? And they're like, well, we don't love it, but we understand why. That was the moment for me of where I really started to embrace security awareness. And I really started leading my program with awareness, and I started doubling down on it. And I also started to change awareness, my thoughts on awareness, away from more punitive of like who clicked the link and let's make sure they're doing all the right stuff, to more, how do I make this part of my program? And there's a great quote from Colin Powell, I'm sure you know, is when people stop bringing you their problems, you stop leading them. And it's very true with security. If people don't tell you what's wrong, or they don't want to bring to you what's wrong, then how can you help them, right? You're not really part of that. And, it's not exactly answering your question, but I think I was more focused on how do I create the right culture and tone for how I roll out security awareness so people would feel comfortable bringing those things to me and my team so we could address them.
It sounds like what you're doing, Jack, is you've added a little bit of psychological safety to that environment. Where I know, yeah, I'm wearing a black hat, but if I wore the white hat, um, people would feel, hey, it was okay to come tell Tom Sue that something's not right. And even if but because if they're not feeling safe enough to tell you that, you'll be in the dark, and I think that's a worse situation. And
Yes.
so if you think as a CISO, you're trying to make sure that your program and the mission and vision that you've tied to your organization's mission resonates. And I think the why that you mentioned there also helps, but also the way you mentioned it, you're not going after and going to nail someone to the wall for having a problem. We're going to say, it's just clear that you don't understand what this risk is like and how you can be there.
Now, like a good example of this is you also have to really live it, right? So when the CEO would ask, okay, who clicked on the link? I would just give him the numbers. And if we had some repeat people, I'd be like, well, we have so many repeat offenders. We're addressing those. We're talking to those people privately. And then I'd be like, but let me give you the list of names of the people who reported it. I would like to randomly select a couple of these people and give them Starbucks gift cards. So now, just in the way I'm interacting with the CEO, and then that is very contagious. People know how, if we just say no, we're not going to report the clicks and we'll really care about reporting, that you reported it, but then you go and give the list to the CEO, it doesn't hold up. I think you really need to make sure that people see that you are celebrating and publishing the people who report it and rewarding them with gift card drawings and sharing those names with the CEO. But the people who made an accident and clicked, that's something we're dealing with privately, right? I'll call them individually. I'll make sure they get additional training, especially for repeat offenders. But there's no reason to trot them out there, right? Because if you do, you create a culture of fear, and then they won't tell you when there's something wrong, right? And we're also seeing, like, in the security awareness space, it's evolving, right? We've been very focused on phishing because 90% of attacks start in the inbox. But when we look at the recent attacks from like groups like Scattered Spider, where they took out MGM Grand, they went after Marks and Spencer, Land Rover Jaguar. In all three of those attacks, they were voice attacks, not email. We're starting to see more phone calls. We're starting to see more text messaging. We need to update our training, and we need to also make sure, what I liked was by building a culture of reporting, it didn't matter if it was an email. They'll now tell me about everything they get. It's a weird phone call, or is it a weird text message? Because we've created a culture of reporting. And I think that's really important.
Well, it reminds me that you go back to the Kevin Mitnick days when he was being chased down by a Japanese guy, I forget his name, but nonetheless, he social engineered his way into many different things, showing that the technology wasn't necessarily the issue; it's the way the people interacted with it. And I think that's where you're touching the bases, where people equate you as a security leader to an open door to come to, hey, not everything's perfect. Let's figure out where it is. I had that opportunity similarly when I was at the university. We had an HR IT orientation session. So for every week there was new staff. I found a way to get in front of that new staff every week. It could be 20 people, it could be 5 people, but over a year, 50 weeks of that, you pretty much started building. I got to build a wave of people knowing what the security issues were, what the controls were that we placed in, mostly around passwords, password sharing, addressing cultural problems in a higher education space. And I found that was a value because people knew me, even though people who were around longer years. Let me go back. People who were new brought the new hotness about what was going on in IT and cybersecurity. And that was a helpful place because I started building those relationships early on. Well, let me switch to what are the techniques that you think you would do? I know we talked earlier about how to get in front of all the production line employees or other events. What kind of events would you suggest people lay out in their awareness activities?
So security awareness is no different than everything in security. It's always layers. Everything we do in security is layers. Same thing with security awareness. You need to make sure that you have multiple short, frequent touch points with all of your employees in different ways, because people learn in different ways. People receive information in different ways. And I think it's really important to do that. Some people, they do well with email messages. Some people do well with a short 5-minute, online training once a month. Some people do well with live, webinar training, maybe once a year or quarterly. Some people like the little games. We would put up messaging on the TVs. We would put out different communications. Also, I was very fortunate in my last couple of companies that the very first slide was our safety slide, and every all hands meeting with the CEO, and the second slide was a security slide. I was very successful with connecting our security program with our safety program. And we merged those two together, and I was able to ride on a lot of the safety stuff with security. So in a manufacturing environment, in a safety-based culture, one of the things that you often do is when you start a meeting, you start it with a safety moment. We incorporated in cyber moments to where during that start of the meeting, it could be a safety thing, tag out, lockout mechanism for electric, or somebody could share how they got scammed on Facebook Marketplace selling a truck. And we found that it was very popular with the guys, right? So the guys on the floor, they got a little bored of trying to think of a safety fact to start a meeting with. It was nice that they got to add a cyber fact, right? And that worked well. And it was really nice that, right after the safety slide was a security slide. And we got to present on how we were doing with security or something that's happened. I really think that it's frequent, short, it's often, it's in multiple formats. And you need to mix it up, right? You need to change the messaging. You need to change the approach. You want to bring in guest speakers. I would bring in the FBI to talk. That would get people's attention, right? We would change our, even the programs we used for, so that way the videos didn't always look the same. We would do different phishing attacks. We would also do focused training. This is something that's becoming, was a best practice. That's now a requirement. Your folks that are in, HR, finance, executives, they are heavily attacked with business email compromise. These are very sophisticated, targeted attacks. Those groups need additional training that's specific to their environment that goes above and beyond what your average employee would need. And I think that's also very important to do that specific training to them. even in your own IT department, people with privileged accounts, especially developers. Developers are heavily targeted on LinkedIn, and they often have a lot of privileged accounts or access to service accounts, and they're targeted directly. So they need additional training.
Well, one thing I'd add is for sure small, different flavors, different sizes of things, but you have to tell a powerful story. And Jack, you do that regularly. I participated, or at least got to sit in on what we call the tabletop exercise. That actually turned out to be more an executive awareness session of what your processes are, and telling. Well, we used to call them true stories in naval aviation. Like, there I was, fat, dumb, and happy. Then I got jumped by some MiGs. Well, that wasn't. Those are places that you set the scene, but you tell the story about how that either near miss disaster or tangling up in a recovery. You end up emphasizing a couple key points that people will remember, retain, and then they'll also call you up when they see something like that.
On that point, Tom, when an event happens, when you have a bad day, right? Let's say there's an account compromise, or a laptop gets compromised, or somebody clicks the link, or you wire transfer some money. The first reaction is, we got to keep this quiet. Let's keep a lid on it. Let's have a tight group. We don't want to tell anybody. I was working with a customer, a new customer I had not had a lot of interactions with, and we had a bad event, and it was, we lost money, and it was to the point where we got together, the CEO, the CFO, we're briefing them on what happened, and they asked, what do we need to do? How do we protect ourselves from this happening again? And I said, you got to open up the kimono. You got to do an all hands. You need to talk about it. You need to show the screenshot of it. You need to explain how it happened, how it tricked us. You need to make sure that we get the message far and wide. And they kind of paused for a minute, and they were like, that's not what we were expecting. And they were like, let's do it. We're getting everybody together Monday morning, 8:30. We're going to talk about this. And I could not applaud that leadership team enough. That is not an easy thing to do. It's not the first reaction, but it made a big difference, because boy, when the message came from the boss, hey, we got tricked. It happened. This is how it happened. This is how the message looked. This is what it looked like. Here is how it unfolded. It told the story. There was no blame. No one got in trouble, right? That was a big message, because, everyone's kind of worried, well, boy, the person who fell for it, are they going to lose their job? That was good, because that now set a culture tone. And then now everybody has a much better awareness of knowing what to look for, because it was a real event. It was that true story, right? It got people's attention, and it was coming right from the boss. That's a company I'm not going to be worried about on attack. Another great kind of true story is, I was on a security awareness training session. I'm talking about, business email compromise. I'm talking about, how people get pushed into sending money out. And the CFO interrupted me, and he's like, hey, man, can I say something? I was like, sure. And he's like, he approached the team, and he's like, guys, we've been in business for over 100 years. We have an outstanding credit rating. We have a great reputation with both our customers, our vendors, our suppliers. We pay our bills on time. We collect on time. If somebody is pushing you to go beyond the process, to go outside of our normal terms, bring it to my attention, but you do not need to react to it. Do not let somebody bully you into this. Take your time, follow your process. No one's ever going to ask you to do an emergency wire transfer. If some vendor or customer is telling you you have to change payment terms right away, or you're going to lose a deal, don't worry about it. We're a good company. We're in good standing. Don't let them rush you. And I was just like, wow, that's the best messaging you could tell your team, is just he gave his team permission to slow down and reiterate it, that they're in good standing. There's no reason to let somebody on the phone or an email push you into skipping your process or rushing, right? Because that's social engineering. And I feel
Well,
like
I
he's
think,
the best way to diffuse it.
yeah, and as a CISO, ideally you can share that knowledge with your other CFOs or other relationships, so people don't necessarily think that they're going to be, um, I should so that they can be just like that CFO. I remember with an organization that had a business email compromise after it happened, they were very helpful. They gave the attackers the form, which was to change the bank information, and they missed a couple processes pieces, but the CFO in that organization said this is a big lesson. It was a significant amount of money that went to the wrong place, and they were just being helpful. And you have to roll back and like helpful's here, but here's the boundary. Well, with that in mind, we do a lot as a CISO to strengthen the organization's awareness and activities. What, Jack, do you think CISOs need to do to keep themselves sharp?
Great question. This is a tough one. We've got full-time job. We've got a lot going on. It's hard to stay up on all the latest news, right? I do my best to, make sure I'm keeping up on the news threads out there. But I think there's no substitution for relationships, right? I really support people to be involved in their local community groups, ISSA chapter meetings. I try to go to conferences when you can. Those events are the ones where I really walk away with information that I retain and reuse. The news feeds, the websites, the little podcasts here and there, those are nice to give me little nuggets and kind of stay up current on what's going on. But I find that
being like CISO office hours,
like CISO's office hours, exactly. But I think it's really important to be part of the community, right? You've made a choice to have a career in InfoSec. The best way to grow your career is to be part of the community, join some local groups, attend a local conference. They've done a tremendous amount for me to help my career. I wouldn't be where I'm at without the folks that have helped me through the years. And I encourage everybody to do that.
well, that's a great idea. It reminds me of when I was in higher education. Many people, if their university or college was a member of the ISAC, the Research and Education ISAC. If you're not in that sector, you can join an ISAC. There's a government, multi-state ISACs. Some of them have fees. I think most of all of them do, but there are also community organizations about cybersecurity where you as a CISO or a cybersecurity leader can be involved in the community, learning more about what's going outside your industry that may affect your industry. But in higher education, there was a lot of sharing going on. Who's got the Google, who's got the Microsoft challenges, who's doing Zoom, who's doing Teams. How do you adapt or adjust? I know some schools that had all of them. So you've heard of people like, I don't know anything about Google. Well, you had Google, you had Microsoft, you had Zoom, you had Teams, you had Box, you had everything. And you had to kind of know where all those were. And sometimes you got information from your colleagues who are your peers. And so that network is a good idea. What else would you do, Jack?
Those are really it. I'll be honest that I kind of just surf the web and try to stay involved with my community. I try to go to some local meetings. I go to some conferences, and that's really it. I don't really do much more than that. It kind of keeps me up to date and grounded. And I try to, also, relying on vendor partnerships too, right? I think that that's something that's undervalued. We spend a lot of money with our vendors, right? Like I used KnowBe4 as my security awareness training solution. I had relationships with like AV vendors, like a Sentinel One or a Palo Alto. I would make it as part of my contract that I wanted to make sure I was part of road mapping sessions of where they're going with their product. I wanted to make sure that I was getting health checks to make sure I'm using their product as well. And then I would ask them for updates and I would subscribe to their newsletters. And for like KnowBe4, for instance, I would very much I'd meet with them quarterly and be like, okay, What should we be doing with our solution? Well, how should we be changing it? What better phishing mechanisms are there out there? What new features do you have in your tool? What are your other clients doing? And I would just ask.
Well, that's interesting. It makes me think, back in my corporate CISO day cycles, sometimes we say like, oh, I don't want to hear from another vendor. I don't want to hear from another, another sales call. I found that if I set aside a specific time and I receive a panoply of sales or account executives who want to talk about their product, I would select some and use those as a way to educate myself about what's going on in the industry. But there's a twist there. I've seen some people figure out say, hey, I've got a risk because I don't have that tool. I don't have this capability. Well, you actually have a risk that a tool might meet. But sometimes people go like, hey, I need that new shiny thing. And then you put it in, you're like, well, I don't have the resources to actually implement it. So use your vendors or potential sales calls to learn more about what's going on. If you can build relationships with them and they can at least educate you about what they're doing, where they see other utilizations of specific tools or services. Because then suddenly in a crisis, you don't have to do the research. You've already talked to a couple different people. Now that's kind of hard. Here we are in that vendor space. But my experience was that I don't shove away vendors. I talk to them. I go to the conferences and I talk to them and figure out what's going on. And yeah, I may get a few emails or a couple vendor calls, but that's an opportunity for you to learn more about what's going on in space that you might not actually have bandwidth to go explore. Well, Jack, thanks for your time. This is fun. We always have really exciting conversations amongst our CISOs and our incident response teams. And we're really glad that you can join us for this discussion about security awareness from the CISO's perspective. This is Tom Sue and Jack Nicholson from Inversion 6. This is the CISO's Office Hours. If you like it, follow Jack on LinkedIn. You're probably already following me. Jack's got a lot of friends on LinkedIn. And then you can click and like on the video here. I'm not sure what all this is about. It's not about revenue for me. It's about us helping our community know what's going on.
Thank you.